First, let us see how a typical spinal nerve is formed. Here is a cross-section of the spinal cord at the thoracic level. As a rule, the sensory fibers will enter the spinal cord from the back, means this is the posterior or the dorsal aspect. The motor roots will exit the spinal cord from the anterior aspect or the ventral aspect. Here is the dorsal horn, the ventral horn, receiving the sensory neurons or giving off the motor neurons. Now we know that the fibers of different diameters will be carrying different modalities, but they are all sensory fibers having their cell bodies in the dorsal root ganglia and entering the dorsal horns. The motor fibers pass through the ventral root of the spinal cord. When these two roots join together, we get a mixed spinal nerve or the nerve trunk, which will then give off an anterior ramus and a posterior ramus. Both are mixed nerves. Okay. Now, if we take the example of the anterior ramus, if we follow through, at some point, there will be individual fibers going to the muscle and the skin. Now, in this image, where is the sympathetic nervous system? In addition to the anterior and posterior horns, we also have a lateral horn that contains the sympathetic neurons. These neurons are basically motor, so when they come, they will pass into the anterior horn, travel along the motor neurons in the anterior root, and then they go into the spinal nerve. But that doesn't directly go to the skin or the muscle. Instead, it takes a detour, goes to something else called the sympathetic chain or the sympathetic ganglia. Because this neuron goes to the sympathetic ganglion, this neuron is called a preganglionic fiber or a preganglionic neuron, and the pathway through which it escapes the spinal nerve and goes to the ganglion is called white ramus communicans. There is another set of neuron which will exit the ganglion, rejoin the spinal nerve, and then go to its destination. Now note that because this neuron is leaving the ganglion, it's called a postganglionic neuron, and the pathway through which it re-enters the spinal nerve is called a gray ramus communicans. Probably the example shown here is going to the skin, so maybe he is supplying the sweat gland. You can see that the postganglionic neurons, which have synapsed in the sympathetic chain, can go to all the blood vessels, be it to the skin or to the muscles. The sweat glands are the arrectoris pili muscle in the skin. Some fibers which come from the spinal cord, the preganglionic fibers, without synapsing here, they go all the way down to the abdomen. These fibers are now called the splanchnic nerves. They go and synapse in a totally different ganglia called a prevertebral ganglia, like your superior mesenteric ganglia or the celiac ganglia, for example. From there, a postganglionic neuron will arise, going to supply the visceral organs.